The Germans were used to conserving. The Americans were used to producing. That difference was beginning to decide the war. Behind every moving Jeep stood a machine shop that moved with it. Portable forges, welding rigs, spare parts packed in steel crates, everything a factory floor needed, rolling across the French countryside. Field mechanics worked beside the front lines with the ease of Detroit assembly men. Engines were swapped, transmissions replaced, tires mounted, radios rewired, all within hours. For German units, maintenance meant retreat. For the Americans, it meant a lunch break. Major Heinrich Zimmermann of the 12th SS Panzer Division captured the growing despair. The American supply system functions like an assembly line extended to the battlefield. We patch and pray. They replace and proceed. They have removed the friction from war. As Jeeps multiplied, so did their uses. In days, soldiers began modifying them for every task imaginable. Engineers welded steel plates to the sides for protection against small arms fire. Infantrymen mounted twin machine guns on makeshift brackets. Wire cutters sprouted from the bumpers to slice through the piano wire traps that German troops had stretched across roads. Signal units turned Jeeps into mobile radio posts. Medics transformed them into ambulances with stretchers tied to the frame. Officers used them as command cars. Chaplains used them to carry altars. To the Germans watching from the hedgerows, it looked as if every Jeep had a different purpose. And together, they served one: momentum. The American advance didn't move like the Germans expected. It flowed. Recon patrols slipped through fields instead of roads. Artillery observers relocated before counter-battery fire could reach them. Convoys appeared and vanished like clockwork. German commanders tried to predict the rhythm and failed. Every time they prepared an ambush, the Americans came from a different direction. Through a hedge, across a stream, over a hill no vehicle was supposed to climb. Their four-wheel drive and light frames turned the Normandy countryside into their ally. By mid-June, the bocage that was supposed to defend France had become a maze for the Germans and a playground for the Americans. Where maps ended, the Jeeps continued. Every farm lane, every orchard became a potential road. There were no predictable fronts, only fast-moving tendrils of mechanized patrols probing deeper into occupied France. Oberst Hans von Luck of the 21st Panzer Division later wrote, "Ingenuity. The Jeep gave every American unit the mobility we achieved only with our elite mechanized forces. They appeared where no vehicle should have reached. In orchards, behind lines, even along footpaths. They were everywhere, carrying radios, mortars, and machine guns. There was no longer a front line, only movement. That movement began to eat away at morale. German soldiers watched identical vehicles replace the ones they destroyed. Every explosion, every ambush, every small victory disappeared into an ocean of replacements. It felt like punching water. For some Germans, the psychological blow went beyond logistics. They noticed something their ideology said was impossible. In the American columns, black soldiers drove jeeps, commanded motor pools, supervised white mechanics. To men raised on Nazi racial hierarchy, it was incomprehensible. Feldwebel Kurt Wagner noted in his diary, "Negro soldiers operate and repair these vehicles with the same efficiency as white soldiers. Our racial theories say this cannot be, yet the evidence is undeniable." The realization was quiet but corrosive. If their entire worldview could be disproven by a soldier with a wrench, what else might fall apart? The German mind prized craftsmanship, the perfect machine, the elegant design, the lasting engine. But the war in Normandy wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. The Americans had decided that good enough multiplied by thousands was unbeatable. Colonel Ernst Wagner of the Panzer Division summarized it in a report to Field Marshal Rommel. "We face an enemy who has industrialized warfare. They mass-produce military vehicles with the same methods used for civilian automobiles. Every soldier can drive and perform basic maintenance. Their entire society is mobilized for mechanical war in a way ours never achieved." German factories turned out the beautiful but rare Kübelwagen, built with care, engineered for longevity. American factories produced the crude but reliable Jeep, built by the thousands, engineered for replacement. General Major Fritz Behling, commander of a panzer division, admitted the uncomfortable truth. We perfect individual vehicles, while the Americans perfect the system that produces vehicles. We are artisans fighting an assembly line, and the assembly line is winning. By late June, the traditional German tactics, ambushes, demolitions, sabotage, had lost their edge. Blow up a bridge, and American engineers appeared within hours with portable pontoons. Destroy a convoy, and another filled the road by evening. Mine a field, and jeeps simply drove around it. Every attempt to slow the invasion was smothered under the weight of endless replacements. The Germans were fighting time itself, and time belonged to the Americans. As one exhausted lieutenant remarked, "They fight with the power of a factory. We fight with the pride of craftsmen, and pride cannot outlast production." By the final weeks of June, the American invasion had transformed Normandy into a living factory. The sound of engines never stopped. Convoys, jeeps, trucks, an orchestra of industry echoing across the French countryside. What German soldiers had once thought impossible was now routine. A fully motorized army operating far from home, supplied as if the front line was just another assembly floor. To the German command, it was chaos that looked like order. Their own supply lines crawled behind horse-drawn wagons and fuel-starved trucks. Meanwhile, the Americans moved with mechanical rhythm, an army synchronized by gasoline and gears. By July, over 15,000 vehicles were ashore. The Jeep had become the symbol of Allied mobility, the heartbeat of an advancing empire of engines. Wherever one broke down, two more appeared. Wherever one was destroyed, a replacement rolled in before the smoke cleared. German radio operators began calling them Die kleinen Teufel, the little devils, because no matter how many were burned, they always came back. The contrast was more than mechanical. It was cultural. Germany's war was the last crafted by hand. Elegant weapons, carefully maintained, built to endure. America's was the first assembled by industry, standardized, mass-produced, and disposable by design. For the German soldier, every rifle, every tank carried a craftsman's pride. For the American soldier, it carried a serial number. One culture built machines to last forever. The other built them to win right now. Colonel Ernst Wagner of the Panzer Corps summarized the realization with brutal clarity. "We are fighting yesterday's war with yesterday's ideas. The Americans fight tomorrow's war with factories instead of soldiers." He wasn't wrong. Behind every Jeep stood Detroit. Behind every tank, Pittsburgh. Behind every crate of spare parts, Chicago, Cleveland, and 1,000 towns that had turned themselves into extensions of the battlefield. When one factory's line went down, another picked it up within hours. America didn't just produce weapons, it produced systems. And those systems made the war unwinnable for anyone still fighting by hand. For German troops in the field, that abundance became unbearable. Every destroyed Jeep, every burning truck, every shattered convoy meant nothing because another followed. They saw mail delivered to the front in new vehicles, hot meals brought forward on freshly painted Jeeps, chaplains arriving with portable altars bolted to dashboards. It was war fought with the comfort of civilization intact. And to men who had grown used to scarcity, that was the most demoralizing sight of all. In a letter home, a German lieutenant wrote, "The Americans live in motion. They eat warm, drive fast, and never seem to run out of anything. We, who once moved like a storm, now move like a shadow." The German High Command tried to adapt. They ordered units to destroy vehicle concentrations, but there were no concentrations, only everywhere. They planned to cut supply lines, but every unit had its own. They tried to exploit American dependence on fuel. But the Allies had turned refueling into routine. Every solution met an answer, every setback a replacement. When Operation Cobra began in late July, unleashing the breakout from Normandy, the Germans finally understood the truth. America didn't fight with men alone. It fought with production. By the end of the Normandy campaign, German intelligence estimated the US could replace every vehicle lost in France within 2 weeks. 2 weeks? A single fortnight to erase an entire battlefield's worth of losses. Rommel's staff dismissed the number as impossible. They were wrong. It was conservative. The Kübelwagen, Germany's light reconnaissance car, was a triumph of engineering. Reliable, efficient, beautifully made. But its perfection was its prison. Every bolt was carefully machined, every part specific, every repair complex. At peak production, Germany built only a few dozen each day. America built hundreds of Jeeps before lunch. General Major Fritz Behling put it best in his post-war memoir. "We were artisans fighting an assembly line. The assembly line won. The same pattern unfolded everywhere. German tanks, aircraft, and vehicles were designed to last. American ones were designed to return, or be replaced. And in the arithmetic of war, that difference became fatal. When the war ended, those lessons didn't disappear. They became the foundation of the modern world. German officers who had fought through Normandy went home to rebuild their nation, and they carried the memory of that industrial storm with them. In the years that followed, Germany's reborn industries began to mirror the American philosophy they had once fought against. Standardization, mass production, design for simplicity. The Volkswagen, born from the wartime Kübelwagen, would go on to conquer peacetime roads the way the Jeep had conquered battlefields. The artisan's craft had evolved into industrial art. Feldwebel Otto Schultz, who spent 3 years as a prisoner of war in the United States, later said, "In Normandy, we learned that modern war is not about courage or skill, but capacity. The Americans taught us that victory belongs to whoever can replace losses faster than the enemy can cause them." The Jeep was not a vehicle. It was a philosophy on wheels. The story of the Jeep was more than a technical success. It was a cultural triumph, a revelation that the battlefield could be managed like a production line. That innovation didn't belong to generals, but to workers, the welders, the assemblers, the men and women who turned bolts in Ohio and shipped steel from Pennsylvania. The Germans fought with bravery. The Americans fought with blueprints. And in that clash between human skill and industrial scale, the future was decided. The age of artisan warfare was over. The age of mass production had begun. Oberrichter Klaus Müller, the German officer who first watched those columns roll inland on June 7th, would later write in his memoir, "We thought we faced an army. We were wrong. We faced a nation that had turned its factories into soldiers." Today, the Jeep stands not just as a relic of war, but as a symbol of what happens when innovation, will, and industry move as one. It changed not just battlefields, but economies, societies, and the very definition of power. Because power, the Americans proved, isn't just about courage or command. It's about production, the ability to build faster, move faster, and adapt faster than your enemy can think. In the hedgerows of Normandy, the Germans learned that lesson the hard way, and in doing so, they witnessed the birth of a new kind of warfare. One where the hum of engines would forever replace the silence of waiting. The Jeep didn't just carry soldiers, it carried the future. June 7th, 1944. Near the small Norman village of Sainte-Mère-Église, the dawn air still carried the salt of the Channel. Oberrichter Klaus Müller of the German 709th Infantry Division raised his field glasses toward the coastline and froze. Stretching inland from Utah Beach was a line of American vehicles so long, it seemed to have no end. He counted them, methodically, like a man trying to impose order on chaos. One after another, identical silhouettes, green, boxy, purposeful. In just 2 hours, he tallied 117 of them, each one shining, each one spotless, each one looking as though it had just rolled off an assembly line in Ohio, not through the blood and sand of an invasion beach. What Muller was witnessing wasn't simply an army arriving on French soil. It was an industrial revelation, a sight that shattered every assumption the Wehrmacht had made about war itself. The vehicles the Americans called jeeps had crossed an ocean in endless convoys, emerging from landing ships like mechanical ants from a hive. Each landing ship tank, the massive, flat-nosed vessels that dotted the horizon, carried up to 30 of these little machines, and hundreds more ships were arriving every hour. To the German defenders, this wasn't just reinforcement, it was multiplication, as though the Allies had discovered a way to mass-produce war itself. On the steel hoods, faintly visible through the dust, were markings: Willys Overland Motor Company, Toledo, Ohio; Ford Motor Company, Dearborn, Michigan. Different factories, same design, each stamped with the same promise of mechanical consistency. Their official designation was truck, quarter-ton, 4x4 command reconnaissance, but to the Germans watching from the hedgerows, they were something else entirely. The embodiment of a terrifying truth. They weren't fighting men anymore, they were fighting machines. And the civilization that built them. 2 days later, a shaken Feldwebel named Vera Lindemann, commander of the 3rd Company, 919th Grenadier Regiment, wrote in his after-action report, "The enemy possesses vehicles in quantities we reserve for ammunition rounds. Every American unit, down to the squad level, appears to have motorized transport. We destroyed 12 of their reconnaissance cars yesterday. This morning I count 40 in the same sector." He ended with a line that would echo through intelligence briefings for weeks. "They treat complex military vehicles the way we treat rifle cartridges, as items to be used and discarded without thought." The scale of it defied logic. Between 1941 and 1945, American factories would produce over 640,000 jeeps, more than enough to give one to every man in the German 6th Army twice over. At peak speed, Ford and Willys rolled one off the line every 90 seconds. To the American worker, it was just another shift. To the German soldier, it was a nightmare that didn't end. While German factories struggled to build 50,000 Kübelwagens across the entire war, the Americans were manufacturing 10 times that many and shipping them across an ocean faster than the Wehrmacht could destroy them. What made this possible wasn't just money or manpower. It was something deeper: standardization. Every American Jeep, no matter where it was built, could share its parts with any other. A transmission from a wrecked Ford could slide into a Willys chassis in minutes. Engines, wheels, spark plugs, fan belts, all interchangeable, all identical, all predictable, and those spare parts, they were already waiting, prepackaged, labeled, and distributed to the front based on statistical failure rates. The science of mass maintenance. German observer Hans Rieker of the 716th Static Infantry Division watched from a hedgerow near Carrington and wrote in disbelief, "The Americans do not repair their vehicles. They replace broken parts from an endless supply. I saw a damaged Jeep restored to operation in under an hour. The entire engine removed and swapped like a child changing a toy." He concluded bitterly, "We would need a week to perform such a repair. They do it under fire, smoking cigarettes. In the Wehrmacht, a vehicle was a possession, tracked, recorded, respected. Losing one through negligence was grounds for court-martial. Every mechanical problem was treated with surgical precision. Parts were repaired, salvaged, or remade when replacements weren't available. But the Americans had done the math. They knew a Jeep's combat life expectancy was roughly 90 days. So instead of building a repair culture, they built a replacement culture. They flooded Europe with machines faster than the enemy could destroy them. If a Jeep was damaged beyond quick repair, its parts were stripped, the carcass left behind. And within hours, a fresh one arrived from the beachhead. Lieutenant Colonel Otto von Schroeder of the 352nd Infantry Division captured the absurdity and the envy. In a letter to his wife, the Americans fight a rich man's war. They expend vehicles the way we expend ammunition. Yesterday I saw a Jeep strike a mine. The crew walked away unharmed, moved their equipment to another vehicle that arrived within minutes, and continued their mission. The destroyed Jeep was pushed aside and forgotten. In our army, such a loss would trigger reports, investigations, and weeks of paperwork. For them, it's a shrug. By June 10th, the beaches of Normandy had become the world's largest parking lot. Over 12,000 vehicles had landed, and the Jeep was everywhere. In ditches, on beaches, rolling down on narrow Norman roads between stone farmhouses. They seemed to multiply by the hour, and with them came something new. A kind of speed the German army couldn't comprehend. Reconnaissance teams darted across the bocage in patterns no map could predict. Artillery spotters in jeeps moved faster than counterfire could track. Supply lines flexed and shifted like a living organism. The Germans had built their defenses for a war of lines. Strong points, choke points, static maps. But the Americans were fighting a war of motion. A war of engines. The bocage, those thick Norman hedgerows the Germans had believed impassable, became highways for the Jeep. Light enough to crest embankments, agile enough to weave between trees, they created new routes where none had existed. The maps that German engineers had spent years preparing were suddenly useless. Oberst Hans von Luck, commander of a Kampfgruppe within the 21st Panzer Division, would later write, "The Jeep gave every American unit the mobility we had achieved, only with our elite mechanized forces. They appeared in places no vehicle should have reached. In orchards, behind lines, even on footpaths. They were everywhere, carrying radios, mortars, or machine guns. There was no longer a front line, only a swarm of movement. And behind that swarm was something even more formidable, a system that never stopped moving. While the Germans rationed fuel and scavenged for spare tires, the Americans had turned logistics into choreography. Convoys rolled in from the beaches every hour, not just carrying fuel and ammunition, but entire engines, transmissions, even full replacement jeeps, pre-assembled and ready. Mobile workshops followed the combat units, fixing, welding, replacing. Entire field factories on wheels. Lose 10 jeeps in a firefight? 10 replacements would arrive in less than 48 hours. Major Heinrich Zimmermann of the 12th SS Panzer Division wrote, "The American supply system operates like a factory production line extended to the battlefield. Everything is standardized, packaged, and delivered on schedule. They have removed the friction from warfare itself." He ended with a line that captured the despair spreading through the German command. "We fight to maintain what we have. They fight to replace what they lose. We repair. They produce." The psychological shock came quickly. For months, German troops had been told the Americans were soft, soldiers dependent on comfort, untested by hardship. But in the hedgerows of Normandy, they met an enemy who had mechanized determination itself. The endless columns of jeeps rolling inland carried more than men and ammunition. They carried a message. Germany was not fighting an army. It was fighting a nation that had turned its entire society into a machine. Mechanic Gefreiter Wolfgang Braun from the 21st Panzer Division examined a captured jeep and couldn't hide his amazement. "Every component is designed for mass production and quick replacement," he wrote. "The engine is simple but strong. The transmission, robust, not refined. Nothing is polished, yet everything works. They have sacrificed elegance for quantity, and quantity is winning the war." By June 15th, German intelligence estimated that more than 4,000 jeeps were already operating in Normandy. Hundreds more were arriving each day. The numbers didn't seem real. Officers who remembered the invasion of Poland, when entire divisions shared only a few thousand vehicles, now watched a single American beachhead out-motorize the entire 1939 Wehrmacht. What unsettled them most was how casually the Americans treated their machines. Vehicles were used like bullets. Expended, replaced, forgotten. In the German army, each truck and tank had a serial number, a service record, a history. In the American army, they were just parts of a living organism circulating through the arteries of invasion. Lieutenant Friedrich Hoffmann described it in a letter to his family. The Americans use their vehicles as we use bicycles, without concern for wear. I saw one Jeep deliver hot food to 3 men in an outpost. It burned a day's fuel for comfort. In our army, those men would walk and eat cold rations. This wastefulness should be a weakness. But when you can waste without consequence, it becomes a kind of strength.